So if you want to make pizza like this, then you're in the right place. Because recently I found a way to make pizza that's next level crispy every single time. And it's quickly becoming one of my favorite ways to make pizza. And when I first tried this method, it honestly surprised me because it's pretty unconventional. But because of that, it makes pizza unlike any other method I've used before. So the method I'm talking about is the trusty grill. Now, if you don't have a grill, you can always hit up a friend or a relative that does have one. I'm sure they'd be happy to let you bake pizza for them, or you can even go to a public park and use the grills there. Either way though, you can't just throw the pizza on the grill all willy-nilly and expect it to turn out fine. There are a few specific things we need to get right in order to get the proper result. And lucky for you, I've already done the work and made the mistakes that you're gonna wanna avoid. So today, I'm gonna show you the method that I've come up with. And it all starts with the dough. Now, the main consideration with this dough was the hydration level, or in other words, how much water is in the dough. And after quite a bit of testing, I found that generally a lower hydration works better. It allows the dough to become crisp much quicker at the high temperatures we're working with on the grill, which is important so that we don't burn the bottom. So here I'm using a hydration level of 60%. And by the way, I actually created a spreadsheet for this recipe as well, which you can download via the link in the video description. The spreadsheet allows you to modify the recipe to your liking, create different pizza sizes, and scale it however you need to. Now, as far as flour, I'm just using 100% all-purpose flour to keep things simple, and I also tend to like the softer chew that lower protein flours like this provide. And from there, I'm also going to include diastatic malt powder at a baker's percentage of 1%, or in other words, 1 gram for every 100 grams of flour. Now, this ingredient is optional, but it does a couple of things. Number one, it helps the crust to brown more easily, which actually in this case is arguably a disadvantage because it could also cause the pizza to burn. But that's okay because the main reason I'm using it here is because it also contains enzymes that break down the wheat in the dough into fermentable sugars, and so it creates a stronger fermentation and therefore a better rise. Now next, we're going to add yeast at a baker's percentage of 0.5% and salt at a baker's percentage of 2.5%. You notice that I'm not adding sugar or oil because we don't need any help with browning since the heat on the grill will be so intense. And I'm also just mixing by hand here, which I think works perfectly fine for something like this, but if you prefer to use a stand mixer, you can certainly do that instead. In my case though, I'll just stir until everything is fully incorporated and then give the dough a few kneads until it becomes too sticky to handle. At that point, I'll let it rest for a few minutes and change my shirt before returning to finish off the kneading. At this point, I'm going to transfer it to a clear container where I'll look for it to rise by about 50 to 100%. And in order to develop more flavor and complexity, I'm going to do this in the fridge overnight. And by the time I take it out in the morning, it's exactly where I want it to be. So I'll just give it a little folding and kneading to smooth it out. And before I divide it and ball it up, I'm just going to also let it come up to room temperature. It's not 100% necessary, but it's going to make it a bit easier to close off the dough balls. So about an hour later, I'll divide the dough up. And here I'm going to be making 14-inch pizzas, so I'm weighing the dough balls out to 380 grams. Then I'll just ball them up and throw them onto a tray to rise. In my case, at room temperature because I'm going to be making this pizza later today. But you could also throw them back in the fridge for up to 3 or 4 more days if you wanted to. Now in the meantime, let's talk sauce. And you can never really go wrong with a classic New York style sauce in my opinion. So my recipe for that is just an uncooked sauce consisting of great tasting tomatoes, I prefer Alta Cucina brand, combined with salt, a bit of sugar, and oregano. However, since in this case we're cooking on the grill and all of the heat is going to be coming from the bottom, the sauce won't get as much direct cooking, so I do like to cook it down just slightly before it goes on the pizza. Just about a 10-minute simmer on the stove should be plenty until the sauce reduces by about 10 to 20%. Or you can do what I'm gonna do and just cook the sauce on the grill as it's preheating. But now the cheese. For grilled pizza, I much prefer using a low moisture mozzarella as opposed to a fresh mozzarella, just because again, the top of the pizza won't be getting a ton of direct heat, so the extra moisture from the fresh mozzarella might not evaporate enough. Now I also like to grate the cheese as opposed to slicing it, or any other method for that matter, because grating creates more surface area, which will help us to cover the entire pizza, which is especially important with grilled pizza because any spots of the dough that are left dry can burn pretty easily. Now the last thing to prep is our toppings, and for the vast majority of toppings, like pretty much any vegetables you'd use and any non-cured meats like ground sausage, you're gonna wanna cook them in advance. Again, just because they're not gonna get a lot of direct heat being on the top of the pizza. So for me, I'm also gonna make a white pizza inspired by Best Pizza in New York, which you're gonna see more of in some future videos coming up. But essentially for their take on the white pie, they add sesame seeds around the crust, and they top the pizza with some lightly caramelized onions, which adds a super nice sweetness to the pie. So to make my own caramelized onions, I'm gonna use my carbon steel griddle from this video's sponsor, Made In, which conveniently is also perfect for the grill. Now in case you're not familiar, Made In designs professional quality products for the home cook. And if you've seen my Philly cheesesteak series, you've heard me talk about their carbon steel griddle before. Personally, I love it for making things like pancakes, eggs, smash burgers, and for meal prepping large quantities of chicken or anything else for that matter. And in the case of cheesesteaks, it's also the perfect material to simulate the flat top griddle that restaurants use. It can span 2 burners, so it gives me a ton of space to work with, and it's also durable enough to withstand more intensive tasks like chopping up meat for a cheesesteak. But probably my favorite thing about it is that this carbon steel griddle develops a natural nonstick coating over time. There's just something so satisfying about investing in a piece of equipment that actually gets better the more you use it. But that's not all. It can also withstand super high temperatures up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's great for use over a direct flame like on this grill, which is where I'm gonna make these caramelized onions for my white pie. So I'll just add my sliced onions to the griddle along with a bit of oil and a generous pinch of salt, then cook them down over a medium heat, stirring frequently for about 30 to 45 minutes, which I know seems like a long time, but properly caramelizing onions takes patience. If you try to speed it up by using a higher heat, they're just gonna end up burning. Now while I'm here, I'm also gonna make some roasted veggies for my dinner tonight, and this griddle is perfect for getting that nice flavorful char that I'm looking for. And when combined with some kale, spinach, and parsley, along with the homemade balsamic vinaigrette, it makes a really nice salad to go with these wings that I grilled up. So to check out Maiden's carbon steel griddle or any of their other cookware, use the link in my video description to save on your order. Thanks a lot to Maiden for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now let's grill some pizza. And the first thing we need to do obviously is preheat the grill. And as you saw, I already made my sauce on here, my caramelized onions. So it's been heating for over an hour. I've got everything set to high, and you can see it's at probably close to like 650 or 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I've got everything set to high for now because again, since most of the heat from this grill is coming from the bottom, we need it to get as hot as possible before we throw the pizza in there because that's what's gonna help it to cook from the top. So of course we've got our dough, which at this point I think is pretty well proof. Got my flour station here where I'm gonna toss the dough in to prevent it from sticking. I've got all my ingredients here pre-portioned for the 3 pizzas I'm gonna make today. And I like to pre-portion them, especially when I'm coming up to the grill here, just to make things a little bit quicker and easier. And last but not least, we've got the most important piece of this method. So this is a pizza screen, and it's what we're gonna use to bake our pizza on the grill. This way we don't have to launch our pizza directly onto the grill grates, which honestly probably wouldn't even work on most grills because the pizza would just sag through the grates. So these things are literally just a few bucks at any restaurant supply store. I think I paid about $3.75 for mine a couple of years ago. Or you could also buy them on Amazon, but you might just pay a few extra bucks for the convenience. The one thing to note is that you do need to season this before you use it to prevent the pizza from sticking. It's very important, but it's also easy to do. Just heat up the screen for a few minutes at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, then spray it or wipe it down with a thin layer of oil and continue to bake it for about 20 to 30 minutes. You should see it get noticeably darker in color after the first time, but you may also need to repeat this process a few times to get it properly seasoned. Basically, by the time it's ready, it should look like mine does here. Now you might also be thinking, well, couldn't you just put your stone or steel on the grill? And yeah, you could. Personally, I actually prefer stone to steel on a grill because of the higher temperatures that it produces, but I much prefer the screen over both of those. When you use a stone, you're basically just turning your grill into a worse version of a pizza oven. Using the screen allows us to take advantage of the main benefit of the grill, which is that intense direct flame from the bottom. And as we'll see, it produces a pretty incredible result. So when it comes to actually baking the pizza on the grill, of course it's gonna depend a little bit on how your grill is set up, but I'll show you how I do mine. So as you can see, we've got 4 burners here that create heat from the bottom. And as I've already mentioned, I have them all set to high while my oven's preheating. But then once I build the pizza on the screen, we'll throw the pizza on the grill, and then any burners that are directly under the pizza, we're just gonna turn all the way down to low. And then immediately we're gonna shut the lid as quickly as possible. That way we still have that nice residual heat from these high burners, but we're hopefully not gonna burn the bottom of the pizza because we have lower heat on this side here. So let's build our first pizza and we'll see it in action. And now that we've got our setup set up, it's a pretty simple process. So I'll just stretch the dough out on my floured surface, and the main difference here from my usual stretching method is that I'm not intentionally forming a crust around the edge. Instead, I sort of want the same thickness across the entire dough, which I'll explain a little bit more once I start topping the dough. So if you happen to have a rolling pin on hand, it does come in handy, but it's not 100% necessary. Either way, you're just looking to stretch it out until it matches the size of your screen, which in my case is 14 inches. Now again, I also created a pizza calculator spreadsheet for this recipe, so you can just enter your desired pizza size and how many you want to make, and it'll automatically scale the recipe so you end up with the proper dough thickness. Again, you can find that in the video description below. Now normally I do like to spray my screen again right before I toss the pizza on it, just to make sure we don't have any sticking. I forgot to bring the spray up here though, and I think my screen is pretty well seasoned, so I'm just gonna do it like this time. But once you got your pizza on the screen, there are a few things to keep in mind as far as topping. And we're gonna start with the margherita here, but I'm also gonna show you how pepperoni pizza comes out with this method, as well as that white pie that I mentioned earlier. So the first thing to keep in mind is, as I mentioned earlier, I like to shred my mozzarella, and that's to make sure that we get full coverage on the entire pizza, because any spots that are kind of left empty are gonna burn pretty easily under the intense heat. heat of the grill. Now the other thing is that I'm not leaving much of a crust really, if any. Again, since we're not getting much heat from the top, we're not gonna get that super nice browning and caramelization on the top that we're typically looking for. If you leave a thick crust, you kind of just end up with like a bready, not too desirable border around your pizza, which, I mean, like I said, it's not too desirable, so. And so for a simple margarita, that's literally all there is to it. So we can go ahead and throw it onto our oven. I mean, our grill. Now, if you are using toppings, this is of course where you'd add those as well. So for example, with my white pie, I'll lay down my cheese, then my dollops of ricotta, then my caramelized onions. And to get those sesame seeds on the crust, I'll just first need to wet it and then sprinkle the seeds over top. Same thing with the pepperoni, I'll just toss them on right before the pizza goes onto the grill. Again, just toss it on, turn the heat down to low, and then I'm gonna set a timer for 2 minutes, at which point I'll check on the pizza and rotate it if necessary. So just check the pizza, it's looking pretty good so far. I always check the bottom to see if I need to adjust the heat, but right now in this case, it's looking pretty good. Now again, the whole goal here is to keep the overall grill temp as high as possible. So you always wanna open the grill as little as possible and then close it right back up whenever you do open it. So after another 2 minutes, the bottom of my pizza is looking pretty solid, but I think it could use just a bit more charring around the edges. So what I'm gonna do is shift it over to the hotter side, and after just a few seconds and a couple of rotations, it looks to be done. All right, so let's give it a try before it cools down too much. I mean, wow. I mean, you can just hear that crispness on the bottom when I bite into it. You heard me when I cut into it as well. It's just a different texture that you can't get with any other baking method, at least none that I've tried so far. The cheese is perfectly melted without being greasy. The sauce has a perfect flavor profile. It still has that little bit of fresh tomato flavor, but cooking it down definitely helped to prevent it from being a little too raw tasting. And you saw me baking the other pizzas as well, so really you can do this with any toppings. It's just a matter of knowing how to prep them in advance of actually baking the pizza on the grill. And if you're like me and you bake a lot of pizza, maybe you're tired of kind of having the same old thing baked in your home oven, this is a nice way to mix it up as well. And speaking of mixing things up, in a recent video I tried fermenting a pizza dough for 30 days just to see how it turned out, and I compared that against a 7-day dough, a 3-day dough, and a same-day dough. So if you want to see how that turned out, you can check out that video right here. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.